Hey there, everyone. Happy Wednesday and welcome to the SANS Threat Analysis Rundown, our very first live stream. If you've joined us in previous months, we've been a webcast. I posted this for over a year, dive into the latest things about what's going on with threats. But what I realized is what was really fun is talking to people, interacting, answering questions. And so we're live streaming. I am super happy to be joined by my colleague, Ryan Chapman. Ryan, you want to introduce yourself, say hello, tell us about your sweet background?
Yeah, hey, hello everyone. My name is Ryan. I am a principal incident response consultant with BlackBerry Security Services. So whenever something horrible happens, our team jumps in to the mix and fixes things for folks. I'm also the lead of a conference called Cactus Con, which is Arizona's hacker/security conference. We're coming up again in February, which seems like a long time away, but really isn't at all. I'm also an instructor for Forensics 610, reverse engineering malware, and I'm currently developing my own course, Forensics 528, ransomware for incident responders. I love to run my mouth. I absolutely love to network, and I love to communicate with folks just like you, Katie. So thank you very, very much for having me on today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. I should probably introduce myself. I'm Katie Nichols. I'm a SANS instructor as well. I teach Forensics 578, cyber threat intelligence. So we kind of come at the world from slightly different but complementary perspectives, I would say, Ryan. I'm also a fellow at the Atlantic Council, their Cyber Statecraft Initiative. And my main job is as the Director of Intelligence at Red Canary. So I do threat intel there. And so like you, Ryan, we kind of see a lot of incidents, a lot of adversaries, that kind of thing. So thanks so much to everyone for joining us. I see we have some folks linked in. I see we got Joel, we got Asan, I'm terrible at names. We got Kwaku, we got Daniel. Thank you all so much for joining us. And today we're going to talk a little bit about ransomware. And this actually, the idea for this live stream came from a webcast that Ryan, you were doing a couple weeks ago. And I wasn't there, I'm not going to lie, I was like working or something. But reportedly you said that there's not that much info out there about ransomware. Is that true? Tell me, was that a true comment?
Yes, so to be specific, there's a ton of fluff when it comes to ransomware. What I was speaking to is the incident responders lens. When it comes to exactly what we're going to encounter when ransomware hits, or for that matter, leading up to when ransomware hits, everything is still held very close to the vest, as you will. So we get this situation where everyone's familiar with the general variants and the certain families, and like, oh, the Clop gang just got arrested, X number of them, like that's awesome, right? But when this ransomware hits, what can you really expect? Where are the executables going to be dropped? What exact files are they using? What are those file names that they're using? What types of accounts do they prefer to pop, and how are they moving laterally? That information is out there, but it's not necessarily an aggregate, and it makes it very difficult for folks who haven't, sat through what we're about to do right now, right? To sat through something like this to actually find it. And so you find little bits and pieces, and I think that just kind of leads to what we see with our clients, every day just about, is that people truly aren't prepared. And by the time it does hit, or they see it about to hit, they can't stop it. So I just this is an awesome opportunity to get together and it's like, here are the resources that we're using, right? Check these things out. Yeah. The more we can share and collaborate as a community, the better we're going to be prepared.
Yeah, and it's funny because like exactly as you said, when you first said it, I was like, oh, there's tons out there. And then I started thinking like, how do I know this stuff? It's because, right, like my team, helps a lot of customers respond to ransomware incidents. And like, we're looking and living and breathing this stuff. And how do you know about it if you're not already doing that? So yeah, let's dive right in. So I promise what we're going to do later is we're going to write up like some show notes or have a blog post with all these links. But we're just going to talk through and we're just going to screen share. And at any point, if anyone has like resources you'd recommend, like, we can't possibly cover everything. So please drop any links you have. So Stephen on the back end, if you can share my screen again, that would be awesome. Ryan, we're going to start with, I think both one of our favorite sites ever. And I hesitate because I think they've updated their website. I mentioned this site at the CTI Summit, and I think we did a denial of service on their website. So what is the DFIR report and why are we both such huge fans of it?
So the DFIR report now, technically, the folks who are truly behind it, they're obfuscated by design. So no one knows or is supposed to know who necessarily runs it. Contributors, however, are denoted. You'll see their Twitter feeds and things of that nature. And all my screens just went out, so hopefully I'm still live streaming right now.
Yeah, I see you. You're good.
All right, cool. There we go. We're back. All right. Anyway, so the thing that's great about this site is right away. I love how you jumped to it first. By the way, This is the type of data that I wish was available in bulk for people to consume. So the reports that they have here, these aren't things like, oh, hey, look the first one here, right? Someone got hit with ransom. I'm thinking of ransomware so much. It's always on the brain. Hanseter, and then Cobalt Strike happened, and then stuff sucked, and here's some MITRE attack things to look at maybe that might help you. Rather, if you just look at the length of this little sucker right here, it is ridiculously comprehensive and really walks through exactly what to expect when something like this occurs. And it goes through each and every little artifact, indicator of compromise. Here's a timeline right up front. In forensics, what's the most important thing that we deal with day in and day out? It's time, right? So right away, we can see exactly what it looks like in terms of the overall flow of the attack. We're actually getting directory names and malware names. So on the screen right now, on the left-hand side, we have 1549, well, it's UTC, or I assume it's UTC, malicious Hanseter DLL execution. And you can see specifically exactly the name of the DLL that was loaded, how it was loaded, all these little bitty tidbits, right? They all form together to draw and paint the true picture of what we're dealing with. And a lot of times we don't get these things. And a lot of times we cannot get these things. So we look at what you see and we look at what I see, right? Everything I do is under NDA. I can't talk about 99% of what I see. So even for my ransomware course coming up, I'm going to take these types of things, but I can't show exact ones from cases I've worked. No, you can't do that, right? And so that's the issue that we run into because people have that, no, we can't do that mentality. There's so much that's actually behind the veil still. And this website, to me, it just kind of lifts the veil. And that's why I really love it.
Yeah. One thing I love about DFA Report is their graphics. Like, I am such a fan. Anyone who has a creative team, we have amazing creative folks on my team that help us out. But I love this because at a high level, you can kind of look through the chain of how does Hanseter get to Cobalt Strike? And you can sort of see the times, which this is always a little bit terrifying, right? User execution at 1548, lateral movement at what? That's less than 20 minutes later. Kind of terrifying, to me at least. So I love the kind of the high level overview. And, I think the thing that I would point out here is that there's still some work you have to do. This is a great starting point, but where I see a lot of people struggle and where my team does a lot of, sharing and trying to educate others is you have to translate this into what works for your detections. So a great example is that DLL execution. How would you detect that? Well, you can detect on the exact, arguments there, the exact DLL file name, but Pyramid of Pain, shout out to David Bianco, drop a quarter in the jar, that's going to change. And so looking for more behavioral things, run DLL 32 spawning from weird places or spawning weird processes or making, external network connections. That's where I think it's really tough. So Ryan, I'm curious, how does your team go about taking something like this and trying to translate that into what are good detections?
So we focus on things like using that run DLL 32 as an example, and I don't know what's going on over here. My monitor is just continually flashing. It's what we get for a live session. So hopefully those little suckers will stay.
Let's do it live. Everything's fine.
Do it live. It'll be fine. So anywho, when we look at the run DLL executions, sometimes the length of the actual path, the entropy of the DLL export name. So in there, somewhere I have it on my screen too. The ESLM, I think it's an L there. Right there, right? How many characters is that? Perhaps you can write a regular expression that may look for that. If you have a system that can actually calculate entropy, I mean, look at that thing. What the heck is that, right? So it may be something that would be useful. So we try to operationalize those types of things. But then at the same time, so that's how we do it, right? As a consulting firm. When I go to most organizations, I say, oh, just calculate entropy on these things. They're like, what? What are you talking about?
Entropy?
How and where are we going to do that, dude? We're pulling EVTX files. What are you talking about, right? Yeah. So then you also have so many organizations are still at that point in their threat hunting maturity, I guess, that they're seeing run DLL32 and just negating it outright. Like, oh, that's a signed executable from Microsoft. That's perfectly fine. So the whole idea is to just try to find as many of these examples as you can. What are these DLL exported function names? How many of these are we seeing per these individual groups? And what about them forms a pattern? So is it length? Is it entropy? What is it? Are they always lowercase, or is it common that they're lowercase? Whatever, and then try to write rules around that.
That's one of my favorite things to do, is looking for patterns. Like, as a threat intel analyst, I'm like, that's similar to this, and that, like, I do that all the time. I'm like, there's this weird run DLL32 thing. I don't really know what it is, but I'm going to look for a lot of examples and then like put them in a spreadsheet and look for commonalities. So that's how I roll. Other things we should mention about the DFIR report, like, this is free. And so if any of the folks from this org are watching, like, thank you. So you can donate to them. I think it's like a Patreon account. So like, for folks like this who just give you free stuff, like, consider throwing them a few dollars if you have the ability to do so. So DFIR report, super awesome resource. I don't know, I think initially they were super secret squirrel, and I tried to like ask them, who are you? And they wouldn't say. And now I think a few members are like making themselves known, but regardless of who they are super awesome. So that's first site. Definitely keep an eye out. They're on Twitter, of course. Keep an eye out on what they post. I almost always retweet it because it's so awesome. So another site, I know that it was at the top of your list, Ryan, is Alienvault OTX. This is one, if you're not using, highly recommend it. So for example, I just searched for Ryuk as an example. And this is community driven. And so I love it for like looking up, just searching, hey, has anyone seen this indicator? Or like, what have people seen on Bazaflix, which I think was a name from Proofpoint. So you see there are these things called pulses that have a bunch of indicators. You can export, you can use. Ryan, you disappeared, but if you want to comment on how you use Alienvault OTX, why this is one of your favorites. Ryan, are you there? I think we lost him. So again, this is community driven, which like a lot of the things we're going to talk about today are amazing because like everyone just shares this with community for free. So that's pretty cool. And the other nice thing is, right, so the indicators are extracted for you, much easier to manipulate. But then you can also just view the original reference, which is nice. You can just go there directly. I remember this Proofpoint one. Ryan, you're back. Whew, I thought we lost you.
Do it live.
Do it live. Alienvault OTX. Why are you such a fan? How do you use that?
Oh, so here's the deal. There are so many places where we can sign up to receive or retrieve information that it's information overflow, and you're just flooded, and it's just a constant stream of like, I don't care. I don't have time for this. I don't care. Go away. This is not one of those sites. This is one of the very few sites where I have a feed coming from all the major posts to my primary email address, and I check them almost every day. I was gonna say every day, almost every day. So for example, I got one this morning for Agent Tesla, and it actually linked back to an article that we had written at BlackBerry. And I was like, oh, how cute is that? I was like, I can talk about it today. Yay, us. So the OTX, whatever ransomware you're wanting to target more, or even just general info stealer that may lead to ransomware, right? Bazaar loader here. Identifying the information provided here can prove very, very useful, especially when you couple it with other sites and services you may have to, for example, obtain samples. So let's see, what was it recently? There was a, wait for it, hold on, something red, Epsilon Red. There was a new ransomware thing that came, it was something that came out, Epsilon Red. The folks at Sophos did a great write-up on it. And then the folks over at Security Now did an episode where they mentioned it. And they were actually, the Security Now folks, I got a little whiny on Twitter. I was like, you shouldn't make fun of it. It's serious. It was like my first, that's lame. But they were talking about it because of essentially how weak it looked in terms of the tech, right? It wasn't super advanced whatsoever.
It's just a bunch of PowerShell scripts.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So I saw that actually as scary as a move to even more automation. And, one business already got hit with right there, right? With at least $210,000 of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
They believe that was one one group. Was that correct, or am I reading that wrong? It's like I'm actually reading that fairly correct. Yeah.
Yep, hospitality industry. So it worked, right? It doesn't have to be advanced to work. It's a bunch of scripts.
Yes, but I wanted these scripts. I wanted them so bad because I teach 610. I love malware, right? So I wanted to get my hands on them and see how they were obfuscated. Now, this article by Andrew Brandt, fantastic article, but it didn't include the hashes. And I was like, whatever, dude. I wanted them.
Hashes or it didn't happen is what they say.
What's that?
Hashes or it didn't happen. Or PCAP
right?
or it didn't happen.
Oh, yeah, I want them. So I couldn't find them here. So I went over to OTX and I just typed in Epsilon Red. And there were 2 articles and both of them had, just search it right now. You'll see probably the top 2. All the hashes
I prepared this in advance, so we'll see if it works.
Just like my monitors keep cutting out. We'll see if this works.
That's fine. Epsilon Red malware. Let's see.
See if that's one of the guys right there.
Got some IPs, so that's sweet.
That's a different one than I was thinking, but well, if you come across it, great. But I looked it up. I found, I don't know how many hashes. I think 20 or 22 on the first one. Pivoted over to VirusTotal. I happen to have a VirusTotal Enterprise account or have access to one at least.
Yeah.
Through work and a personal researcher one because VirusTotal is awesome. And I grabbed all the stuff that I wanted and I was off and running. I was able to write a parser. Oh, look at all those. Oh, yeah.
Look at those sweet, sweet hashes.
Woo, gimme. So I was able to take those suckers, write a parser for it, throw it up on GitHub, and I was all excited. And how did that happen? Well, one resource was a blog resource that was put together by the folks at Sophos. Like, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even known that was coming down the pipeline. And then OTX is just like, here's all the hashes, and I got all happy.
So kind of combining your sources, right? And okay, the first one wasn't in VirusTotal. I don't know if this happens to anyone else. I get very sad when things aren't in VirusTotal. Like, I'm like, dang it, I have to work harder. But I bet if you search these, like one of these would probably be in VirusTotal. So if at first you don't succeed, keep searching until you find something that's there.
Yes.
I'm not going to make you watch me copy and paste. But so, Ryan, I think like one thing that you're saying is, right, combine these tools. So, okay, maybe a blog post from a vendor or whatever source doesn't have everything. But like pivot to Alienvault OTX, pivot to VirusTotal, other sources. One other question that I think is really important for us to talk about is like, how do you manage all this stuff? So you mentioned like with Alienvault OTX, I think you can subscribe via email. I know one challenge for me that like I still haven't figured out, like, how do you keep up with everything? I think one thing for everyone to do is create an RSS feed. That's probably one good practice. Do you use an RSS feed reader, Ryan? I use Feedly, which has like a free version. I'm curious what you use for your RSS feed or any recommendations there for people, because it's hard to keep up with all this stuff.
So because of my research specific to the, my course in progress right now, I actually have set up my own MISP instance, and I've got stuff that I'm just dumping into there. And I also have my own plugged into the Hive, which I really use more, to be honest, myself. I'm not sharing it with the folks right now. And I'm basically just creating like, tickets in there. I also have OneNote where I'm keeping all my notes. And so as you're working a case, you're so hyper-focused on that one case, that one threat actor. By the time you finish that report and move on to the next one, you're like, what was the last one? What was I just doing for a month? I don't know. Like, I don't remember that. I'm doing something else now. So I love the idea of an RSS feed, and I love the idea of TweetDeck. Use TweetDeck at all?
I do, yes.
Yeah, I really like TweetDeck. I'm huge on Twitter resources, as you saw when you saw my list. And I saw you added a bunch of Twitter ones too. I was like, yeah.
Yeah, let's chat a little bit on like some Twitter accounts. And the only thing I can guarantee is we're going to miss people. So I'm sorry in advance when we're going to miss you. But so we started with DFA Report, right? They're super awesome. I think you recommended quite simply just like searching for ransomware.
Yeah, hashtag ransomware in that sucker.
One thing I would say is like to be cautious for hashtag ransomware because like people realize that that's decent for marketing. So you have to like with any of this, right? It's not going to be like every single hit is going to be valuable for your use case. You have to do some filtering, right? And it's kind of funny when I typed in ransomware, like here's one of the people that I was actually going to recommend to follow on Twitter, Alan Liska. He calls himself the ransomware sommelier. He works at Recorded Future and he's super awesome. He does so much for the community. He'll track like publicly reported incidents involving ransomware, like hitting schools. He also talked about our live live stream. So thanks for that. But he has a lot of good kind of free things that he shares in terms of like metrics, tracking stuff. So he's one person I recommend following. Talks a lot about ransomware. But of course, no one on Twitter, especially personal accounts, like we're not machines, we are people. And so please don't get mad if people tweet about comic books or like their workout routine, right? It's part of like being a human. What do you tweet about that's not InfoSec related, Ryan?
I try to avoid it, and that's why I was already
You're
starting
one of
to
those people?
smile while you're saying that. And I was like, oh, every once in a while, there's someone who just has such solid intel, but then like they'll start getting political, and I'm like, no, shut up. I'm like, no,
I'm sorry for my CrossFit tweets, Ryan. Don't judge
keep
me.
it security only. How dare you? No, but I'm guilty. I tweet out. I don't tweet out a lot, but I reply to folks and stuff. So that's retro video game stuff. So I Street Fighter, the fighting game Street Fighter. I used to play it like a little too much, and that's an understatement. So there's folks who are still playing in tournaments and stuff, and every once in a while you'll see that stuff kind of coming out.
Yep.
So I like retro video games. See, there's stuff right here. I've got it all right behind me.
I've noticed your background, kind of sweet.
Yeah.
Other Twitter accounts. So there's this one, Dark Tracer, and this is where I think we kind of pivot into talking about dark web stuff a little bit. I honestly debated whether we should bring up this account and some of the other like dark web sites that we're going to talk about in a moment. And the reality is that, right, a lot of these ransomware operators, as many of you know, they will post leaked information, victim information to dark websites. And this Twitter account actually aggregates a lot of that. I debated showing it because in part, like if you're a named organization by this or some other sites that we're going to show, I don't want you to know about this for the first time via that. So there's that risk. But honestly, I think that as researchers, as threat intel analysts, you need to know that these are out there because you really don't want someone else to be the first one that sees your company is listed. And so I highly recommend, right, if for no other reason than that, right, monitoring like this account lists a lot of companies who've been affected. I think, is this the one that also has a GitHub site, Ryan? Or is that, I'm thinking of Ransomware. So there are a couple of different sites. That's a Twitter account. There's also this GitHub site. I haven't used this one, Ryan. Are you familiar with this one? So Captain Geach, Ransomwatch. I usually use, I think it's the same folks who just have a website. It's just at ransomwatch.org.
Yes, I absolutely adore Ransomwatch. So I run, I co-run a Slack group, and I co-run a Discord server for our Cactus Con conference. Both of them have this feeding into it. One of them Slack, one of them Discord. Both of them are available. It's really quick and easy to set up an API integration. I had never set up an API integration for Slack, for example, and I did it in like 5 minutes. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. So I provided a screenshot. I'm not sure if you can share that particular screenshot from our notes somehow in a pretty way or not. But they monitor very specific leak sites, and then when the leak sites are updated, it gives you like, hey, they've added a new victim or client or whatever they want to call it. And one of the cool things about Ransomwatch is that it also will tell you when one has been removed. So when you see a bunch being added and then a bunch being removed, and then you see some getting removed, it's usually like, oh, they're about to post more. So when something is removed, why has it been removed? Has payment been rendered, or what's going on? Have they leaked that data? Is it now available on an auction site? What have you? But I really like that extra little bit of love, seeing not only when they're added, but when they're removed too. It's really cool.
That's nice. I didn't realize it removed or notified when it's removed as well. So if you're not into like integrating something from GitHub, there's also just ransomwatch.org. I think a really important note though with all of this stuff is that like just because like your company isn't listed doesn't mean you don't have ransomware. I think I said that right. Like it can be an indication. Also though, there have been adversaries who will post fake information. They'll repost information that they've Xfilled 6 months ago and pretending it's new. So right, this is one source of information that we can use. So if you see your company name on any of these sites, like you should look into it, but don't treat it as gospel truth, right? We're dealing with adversaries who have illegitimately compromised our network, so you can't trust them. But Ransomwatch, right, a great resource, Dark Tracer, just to kind of keep an eye out, because again, like it's I would encourage everyone to use this information responsibly. Don't be the jerk who's like an ambulance chaser who's like, oh, this company got compromised, I'm going to go try to sell them things. Like, please don't be that person. People do it. It's not cool. I don't like it. But being aware if your team or like someone you know, right, keeping an eye out for each other. So good to be aware of what's out there. If you want to get fancier, and Ryan, I don't know if your Tor is up or not. If you want to get fancier though, Ryan, and actually like go to the dark web, how do you recommend people do that safely if they want to go beyond just someone else who kindly pulls from the dark web?
Yep, I'm loading it up right now. See if I just wonder what happens here. Do we both share? Can we switch over? There we go. Cool. So
Stephen on the back end. Thanks, Stephen.
All right. Thank you very much, good sir. So this is just a standard macOS build computer, daily driver, if you will. And I've got on here, it's called the Tor browser. So many folks are aware of in the general sense, Tor, right? You've heard of Tor. You're like, oh yeah, you use Tor to be anonymous. Okay. Well, what really is Tor? Now, I don't want to devolve into like a conversation about what is Tor, but I do want to point out there's this great video. It's called How Tor Works. Well, I can't read it because I zoomed way too out, but we'll give you the link here. There you go. A compute cycle deep dive. And then let me zoom right back way out. So many folks don't realize that in reality, what Tor is doing is that when you connect via in Tor and create what's called a Tor circuit, that you're hitting first what's known as an entry node. That entry node is encrypted to you. That entry node is then connecting over to what's known as a middle node. That middle node then eventually connects over to an exit node. Now, the thing is that the real security exists in that connectivity with you and Tor. Now, necessarily, the person or persons or entities that run, manage, whatever you want to call it, the exit nodes, those folks have quite a bit of access to the data on the other side, right? The actual destination where you're hitting. So this is a really good video. We'll include it in our show notes. Just pointing out, you still have to be very, very careful. If you just say, oh, well, I know that I can get to these .onion sites, or I can be anonymous, fully anonymous by using Tor and just downloading and keeping up to date the Tor browser, which is my primary recommended way for the uninitiated folks. Just be very, very cognizant of the fact that you have to use it in a very specific way. Not enabling Flash, not even using HTML5. You can stop it. Like, there's all kinds of things that can still give away your location or your identity, or at least to enumerate bits about you to the threat actors. So one of the things I also wanted to throw out is that as opposed to just going and grabbing the Tor browser and creating a circuit like I have right now, is there's an operating system. It's called Tails. And it is meant to be for the, how would you say this, Katie? For the absolutely true, I don't trust anything ever, 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 ever kind of people, I guess.
Super tinfoil hat wearers.
Yes,
right.
Big time, big time. Now you can have this on a VM, but some people are like, no, I want this on a USB and I want to use it on a burner laptop. Like, it is the epitome of, between boots, nothing is stored, nothing is saved. There's no way to route back to what user agent you're using, or, DNS lookups could still be a problem potentially. But anyways, look into Tails. I recommend this if you're doing, especially if you're dealing with like nation state potential stuff. But when you're dealing with ransomware, even when you just go to a ransomware leak site, you're visiting that particular site, like, could be telling to a threat actor, right? Yeah. So the way that you do that, especially if you're using Tor, because Tor exit nodes are fairly easy to be like, oh, they're using Tor, right? Or private internet access or NordVPN. These things are all easy to identify. It's what we do, right? Okay, it's what we do in our cases. We go like, oh, the threat actor is using this particular VPN. So be careful how you're accessing these things. Always keep in mind operations security, or OPSEC. And if you're not familiar with that, look that stuff up. I've got a video on YouTube where I talk about fundamentals for like job interviewing. I talk about OPSEC in there as an example. So Tails is another good method if you're, very worried about leaving behind any types of remnants about your operating system or your details and things like that. But once you're connected to Tor, for example, on the Mac version, if I just go up here to preferences, you can set things like a bridge. So in certain areas, you can't actually even connect to Tor. So you have to use what's referred to as a bridge. You can use more advanced proxying. So, if you want to do your whole 7 proxies thing, that's an available item here. But one of the cool things about at least the Mac version, I don't recall Windows, to be honest. I use my Mac for so much of my analysis, is that it by default will set up a SOX proxy. So for example, right now, I can just do a curl. Let me hide the rest of my windows here. There, I can do a curl to SANS and hit SANS from my own IP address, right? But I can also use the SOX hostname, localhost 9150, by default, at least on a Mac, and I can hit SANS that way. So I can even use curl to pull down the page code without having to literally load a browser and render the page and let the code run. So that's something I also recommend to folks. Whenever I get a phishing landing page and people are like, oh, just go there in a Tor browser, I'm like, you know what? I don't even want to go in a browser. I just want the code, right? That's all I want to do.
Lower your risk, right? If you don't have to visit it, don't.
Exactly. And I'll give them a user agent, like totally legit. Don't give that. That's a little obvious. But you can, control yeah, it's a little suspicious. You can control your user agents, but I just really like using Tor this way also. But I do have to be careful. There are many articles out there that show people, hey, this is how you use Tor from your entire operating system. Just go set everything to you, and then you're anonymous. Like, be very careful with that. So I wanted to show the Tor method and mention Tails. And then, if you don't mind, Katie, I'll just jump into this guy right here.
Do it.
Because it's already there. I already did it. So there are a number of leak sites that are available. Some of the leak sites are available on Tor, but many of them are just available on the quote-unquote open internet. But when you connect to the Tor network, there's a top-level domain that you can then resolve, which is Onion. So the Onion routing that you can get to when you're connected to a Tor circuit allows you to then view certain websites that are part of what a lot of folks call the dark net or the dark web. It's just a funny way of saying most of these things are connected in via the Tor network, to be honest. So whatever. They're hiding their true identity by essentially using the .onion domain, if you will. So this particular site, and we'll include this, maybe, well, let me talk to you about that after. Maybe I shouldn't show this. But I'm sure we'll be able to, get some folks the site. This is an example. This is a Tor-enabled site. You can only hit it on the dark web, right? And I'm connected right now on Tor browser. And we're looking at ransomware group sites. And I just scroll down, and it's like, hey, whoever runs this, I actually don't know who runs this, but here's how you can give them money if you want, right, to donate. Whoever
Probably
runs
wouldn't recommend that. Like, we don't know who it is. So, like, stay legal, everyone.
Sorry. Bad Ryan comment. If you're going to give money,
Hey, maybe they're legit researchers. You just never know, right? That's the point of Tor, right? Of the dark web.
Thanks, Katie. Sorry. Let's go pay these people money on the dark web. So anywho, they have group leak sites, but then also down here they have ransomware market sites. This is the kind of thing that's another, what you were talking about. But do we show this or do we not show it? I'm not going to click on these because they're literally markets where data that has been stolen or exfiltrated, typically in ransomware-based attacks on these two big ones here, are available for purchase, for bidding on. Now, if you are monitoring those for yourself, that's one thing, but just always keep in mind, and another caution, just like Katie said, whenever you're clicking on things and you're accessing things, you may not supposed to be privy to certain data, but then also keep in mind that exfiltrated data, depending on where you're located, what country and state and so on and so forth, even just having that data, you owning it, you being a custodian of that data could be against the law. So when you go to a leak site and you see, oh, that's one of our competitors, their stuff was leaked. Let's see what they got from them. Maybe not to steal their IP, but just see like, what are we going to get hit with if we get hit? If you download that data, like competitor or not, that could, you got to be very, very careful of that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So like, if you have a lawyer, like talk to your lawyer before doing any of this stuff. Some companies, like they live in the dark web, right? That's like what the service they provide. Other companies, like if that's not you, talk to like your lawyer, double check. Cause like I feel like this is where we get into an ethical gray area. But I think for us, it's really important for us as, people who are talking about this to make you aware that this is out there, right? That you can buy victim data on the dark web. Like, I think it's important that we all know this is out there. So if you're using this as a research source, talk to your lawyers, like think about the ethics of it and tread really carefully. I think that's a great point, Ryan.
And then the final thing I'll show you here is that Lockbit, their new leak site, that Lockbit 2.0. Here, I'll zoom in for you. There we go. Lockbit 2.0. I know there's no current clients or customers, whatever they want to call them, horrible, on the site. So I was okay with clicking on it, which good thing they didn't post it in the last 5 minutes. That would have, oops, sorry. So I just want to show you that this particular one is an onion-based site, right? But also there's a section they have here, conditions for partners and contacts. And for people who have just never seen this type of thing, when I was dealing with my first Maze case back in, I don't remember what year, sure it was 19, my first Xfil case was 2019. They had press releases. They'd call them press releases that they'd put out. And sometimes to get access to these things, you actually have to, hit the Onion network. And this particular one, conditions for partners, I don't know if we can get a sanitized or a scrubbed version of this and get one out. I have a PDF with clickable links, so I can't get that out right now. But this is, they're literally trying to get affiliates for their program, for their ransomware as a service. And there's no shame. They're not hiding anything. They're like, this is what we do. This is how we develop our stuff. These are the things that we do to people to ruin their businesses, right? Here's how fast we are with encrypting their data. And if you believe their own statistics, we have, and this scares me. I don't know if you've seen this one yet, Katie. You notice that? They're advertising a method of exfiltrating data out that's not via our clone here called SteelBit. That's new to me. I just saw that.
I hadn't seen that. That actually gets to a question that someone had. What are common techniques for data exfil and ransomware attacks? And so, like, without even doing it, right? Our clone, you're circling that. And actually, whenever we want to switch back to my screen, I can bring up a blog post that my team actually did about our clone. And so, right, our clone is like, can be used legitimately, but Ryan, I think we've both probably seen that used in ransomware incidents to exfil data. Other than our clone, what else have you seen for exfil?
Exfil is just, it's really sad how much exfil we see in such ridiculously simple ways. FTP, super common, ridiculously common to just FTP data out. And a lot of folks don't know that Windows has built-in native libraries. Well, they're not native officially. They're not called native API, but they do have API calls, system calls to just FTP connect and FTP exfil. We see that all the time. We also see via RDP, which sucks because there's very, very little logging available for, you can copy and paste between RDP sessions. You can drag and drop for many sessions. And guess where that's logged? Guess where it's logged? How much data just went out? Usually nowhere. Very difficult to see that. So we see FTP, we see our clone, but we also see them just connecting to sites sometimes, which is really funny. We'll see them staging in with compression, zip usually, or RAR sometimes, or whatever. And then they'll just literally go open a web browser and they'll just go to whether it's Mega or whether it's File.sd or one of those weird sharing sites that, is quote unquote bulletproof. And they'll just drag and drop data. They're just uploading via web browser. Like, come on. So we see those a lot. Our clone is super, super popular right now.
Yeah, so this is a blog post actually some of my teammates, Justin and Aaron, wrote on our clone, as well as a tool called Mega. All right, and it's so many tools that are misused by adversaries, these can be legitimately used, and that's why adversaries like them to blend in. But this might be a useful one that we'll include in the notes on, how you might try to figure out how adversaries are using these legit tools illegitimately, especially in your environment. So that's a great question on exfil. And I want to pivot a little bit into, so we've talked about a bunch of things and we're only going to scratch the surface. We could talk for 3 hours, but I think one thing I wanted to touch on is the fact that a lot of people talk about detecting ransomware itself. But the thing I wanted to pivot our conversation to is detecting along the whole ransomware attack chain. And this is something that I feel like I talk about all the time and people must be bored of hearing about it, but it's still really relevant. So one thing that I emphasize is if you're trying to prevent ransomware, watch all of these other crimeware families, right? It's known that families like Iced ID or Qbot or TrickBot often will lead to Cobalt Strike that often leads to ransomware. And so I wanted to share, and Ryan, you as well, I really like tracking a lot of folks on Twitter who share information about this crimeware kind of stuff. So the Malware Hunter team is a great kind of hub of this. They also maintain this other site that, Ryan, I know you had mentioned, ID Ransomware. And this is where, like, as always, be cautious, right? You can upload a ransom note or sample encrypted file. The folks behind this, I think they're cool researchers, but you should always be cautious of uploading your data anywhere outside of your org. So there's that site, but Malware Hunter team shares all kinds of good stuff about malware. There are a whole bunch of other accounts that share this stuff. So a lot of times they'll tag their members. So like VK Intel, Bryce Abdo, I think Bryce is over at Mandiant. Yeah, James WT. These folks just like look at malware all day and then they just share what they find. And I am super grateful to this whole community because so many times my team will see something and they'll be like, is this TrickBot or QBot or what is this? The other person that we have to mention is Brad Duncan, Malware Traffic. He is awesome. And I know this was on your list too, Ryan.
I just reached out to him. I think I've reached out to him maybe 20 different times. Say, hey, I'm using your resource for a talk or something, right? And every time he just goes like, all right, cool. But yeah. I pretend like I know him now. Like, oh,
like one of those people who just, and that's what I love about this community. Like the bad news is like ransomware sucks and like malware is awful, but there are a lot of people who are willing to share. Brad is so on it. Like for certain malware families or like campaigns like TA551, that group, like he's the first person that I check. And so definitely check out his website. Like he has blog posts and he shares packet capture and it's in like a really nice, approachable way. I love how he breaks down like, okay, here's, form book. And he has kind of a nice, like these images that you can walk through of like, here's what the packet capture looks like. I think this is really helpful for anyone who's learning as well. If you're like, what should I look at? Like, how do I look at PCAP? Well, go to Brad's site, like download some PCAP, open up your Wireshark, and just try to follow the screenshots that he shares, right? So super awesome account that you should follow because Brad is super awesome.
So going back to we could talk about Brad's site like an entire 8-hour day easily. Going back to your point of stopping the ransomware chain, the top three huge infection points, right? Initial infection vectors. The top two by far are email and RDP, and they take over the crown from one another from week to week. The third, software vulnerabilities. But let's look at those first two, right? Email. When it comes to email and comes to phishing, Brad's site, not only does it show you, hey, here's the actual email the sucker came in. There's all these artifacts. Be careful, by the way. If you don't have a malware VM, you're like, double click, right? Be very careful with when it says malware, it means it's malware. But if you have a malware environment, you can grab all these different downloaders. Some of them are droppers. There's a screenshot of one right there on the screen. You can go look at the code, see what the Visual Basic or the Excel 4 macros, see what they're doing, see how they're being built, and see how you can then protect your organization from that. I get many people ask me sometimes, why do you always say making admins not, hold on, wait a minute. Making users not admins on their machines is a huge way to avoid ransomware. It's because email is a primary vector, and because these freaking info stealers, which used to be called banking Trojans, because the worry used to just be financial in terms of like, oh, your Wells Fargo creds may be stolen, or something like that. Your Bank of Brazil creds will be stolen. But now the same stuff we've been dealing with year after year after year. Hamster's back. What year is this? Come on. All right. So
stuff. Yeah. And a lot of these are very detectable. Like the same thing that, Bazaar does now, like the behaviors in particular, which is why like indicators or behaviors, you should use whatever you can use to detect a threat, right? But we found like a lot of the behavioral stuff, like looking for run DLL32 doing weird things or dropping weird registry keys. It's a lot more durable. But like, why not, right? If like Brad or someone else shares some indicators, here was today's Bazaar loader or whatever, go search for it. Absolutely. But a lot of these things, they act very similarly. And I wanted to highlight this because this is something that a lot of people overlook. They're like, we have to detect the ransomware. Oh my God. Yes, you do. But detecting QBot and Cobalt Strike is also going to help you detect ransomware precursors, which is super important. So you don't want to detect ransomware, trust me. You want to detect before it gets to ransomware. So if you see one of these families, plus like a Cobalt Strike or an Empire or something, that's when you're like, all right, we need to isolate that part of the network, that machine, and make sure we don't have a ransomware incident. So one question, like we have so many sources, we're kind of jumping around. Question came in terms of negotiating with bad actors. That is a challenging area. I don't know if you've done any of that, Ryan, but one resource that I really like, folks over at Coveware. There are a lot of companies that do this. My team doesn't, but Coveware, they have a really great blog post, and I really like, they have like a quarterly report where they talk about like some of the trends in ransomware. This is also a great source that if you are trying to get some maybe metrics on like how is ransomware changing. Also find out, there was a great quarterly report where they showed that, you know, sometimes when you negotiate with a ransomware actor, they are going to exfil your data. They've already exfilled your data and they're going to ransom you again, right? Even if you've already paid. And so Coveware, looking at the sites of like companies who do this kind of negotiation, that's one way that I'd recommend kind of trying to figure out how to negotiate, because that's not something I do. Ryan, any like sources on negotiation, that kind of thing? Any experience there?
I don't personally negotiate. I really don't ever want to have to negotiate. We don't do it at BlackBerry. We send that out. So I can't say specifically to whom, but I can say that in addition to Coveware, the former Crypsis, now Palo Alto Unit 42 umbrella-based Crypsis group, which is also where Brad from Malware Traffic Analysis works, Unit 42 at Palo. They do pretty darn good negotiation. I have some personal experience with them also. I love Coveware's blog, phenomenal. When I talk about the top 3 infection vectors, they're my favorite. They're my go-to because I know, I don't know, I have a good idea as to how many things they actually negotiate versus a lot of other folks who do negotiations. So when they release statistics, personally, I'm more apt to go, oh, okay. Okay, yeah. That's about right.
I think one of the challenges of the ransomware ecosystem is that we each have like our own visibility, right? So like you and I will see, like, my team has a very endpoint focused view. We look at what are the adversaries doing, right? But then as you said, like people who specialize in ransomware negotiations, they kind of see that piece. So I think it's good to kind of know these different sources. So if we can share my screen again, this is an example of one of those Coveware posts that is really helpful. And it's so hard to find good metrics on, you know, is the ransomware problem getting worse? In part because we all have different visibility, different pieces of this. But Coveware has some statistics that I've used, and, you know, they talk about things like, you know, what percentage of attacks involve the threat to leak Xfil data, which is something that we've seen over the past year, just a complete shift to doing that from just encryption. And so this is a great source, but there are many companies that do this. We're just scratching the surface. So like another area that we should talk about is, right, blog posts. A lot of the blogs, right, so DFIR Report is like their own org. They have like a feed, but they're not, you know, a huge cybersecurity vendor. We brought up like blog posts from Sophos and Proofpoint and Coveware. Ryan, are there any from your team at BlackBerry you wanted to highlight? I highlighted one from my team at Red Canary.
On your screen right now, in the middle-ish, I think it says number 8 there, is Zeppelin ransomware. May or may not have been my case that I was working.
May or may not. You cannot confirm or deny.
Where, you know, you run into something and you're like, this looks like Baron ransomware. And you keep looking and you're like, well, it's calling itself Zeppelin, but this is Baron. And then you look into it more, you're like, okay, I get it. Baron has now evolved. It was Vega Locker, then it was Baron. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then it's Zeppelin. So I really like our Zeppelin article. We also recently put one out on System BC, and we put one out on the Paisa ransomware gang, loving Chachi, or sorry, hold on. That's the article name. Paisa loves Chachi. A new Golang.
Oh, yeah, I really like this graphic. This was a good graphic.
Yeah, our marketing's stepping it up. I like it. So this one, you'll notice it's by our research and intelligence crew, and that crew is the same team where, for example, we'll shout out here Anuj Soni, who is a co-author of Forensic 610, where he works. So, you know, as an IR person, I'm supposed to technically take all of our malware and give it to his team. Now, I don't want to because it's fun to play with it, right? But, you know, so really good resources. I really like that blog. I also am super happy that you brought up Red Canary's blog on rclone, because I found that super duper useful, and I give that to folks all the darn time.
Well, thank you. Another Red Canary resource, our threat detection report. This is where if you need to like figure out how to detect some of those ransomware precursor families like Cobalt Strike, Qbot, that can be useful. But obviously there's so many other good teams out there. So like, obviously we're going to mention our blog post from our team, but there's so many good teams. FireEye, you should absolutely subscribe to their blog post. Check them out. They're chock full of detailed info. Awesome team over there, FireEye, Mandiant, whatever they identify as now. You know, what's really cool about this is, right, of course, we're all cybersecurity vendors. And so, like, to be fair, like some of this is marketing, right? You're familiar with FireEye or BlackBerry or whatever, but there's also useful info in here. And so, like, watch out for different vendor blogs. FireEye, a lot of actionable detail in here, right? There are indicators if you like indicators. There's behavioral stuff if you like behaviors. I also really like their kind of overview of the overall attack chain. So that's an awesome resource. I have to bring up some of my favorite blog posts. Microsoft, they've done great stuff on ransomware, great stuff generally. So you should follow them on Twitter, all of these folks on Twitter. But one of my favorite all-time graphics is this one. And some of you might have seen this before. Like it's like from 2020, but it's so cool because you can see kind of some of the common initial access methods, which like Ryan mentioned, RDP, and then how like a lot of these operators go through the same pieces, credential theft, Cobalt Strike, WMI, and then the ultimate ransomware payload is there at the end. So Microsoft does awesome stuff. SecureWorks, I have a friend, Marcel, who works over at SecureWorks, and their team has been churning out some stuff on ransomware lately. There's so many different vendors, different teams who are sharing this stuff. Ryan, who are some other teams that you really like? Any off the top of your head? There's so many.
A shout out back to the Mandiant / FireEye / those folks. I have 5 links to deep dive articles that they've done that are very similar in style to the actual, like the DEFR report, which I can't stress enough how much I love the DEFR report. I sign up for their Patreon. I give them $30 a month. I'm like, here, yeah, heck yeah.
Yeah.
They have a MISP instance, by the way. And my whole thing about what started this whole conversation, right, is that we don't have a massive one as a community where we all dump stuff into, and that's the pipe dream. But it's probably not going to happen, hence showing you all these resources. Yeah, anyhow, I want to go back.
Companies, folks are mentioning Cyber Reason, awesome. Palo Alto Unit 42, we talked about Brad, but there's a whole Unit 42 team. CrowdStrike, I have a link. So if you haven't seen the CrowdStrike adversary, and I brought up NCC group, we're just like hitting these because there's so many people who are sharing, which is pretty freaking awesome. Adversary universe, I think they call it. Like these graphics are super cool. But in addition to the cool graphics from CrowdStrike, there's also details about, for example, Pinchy Spider. They use kind of animal names for their groups. So that's a group behind Our Evil, which is one of the nasty ones nowadays. So you can get details about them and like what tradecraft they use. That's super cool. And like what countries have they targeted? That's super cool too. So CrowdStrike has great stuff. The other thing I like to note, and like Brian and I mentioned this, like comparing our teams and like Coveware, different companies have different visibility. And so there are folks over at like Digital Shadows, like they track a lot more dark web stuff. And so if you're looking for like to compare and contrast, maybe you look at like, you know, what a more incident response space team has looked at for trends. Then you look at what Digital Shadows has said or what Coveware has said in terms of trends. So Digital Shadows, great folks there. Folks over at VMware Carbon Black, they do a great job as well. There's so many, like I can't possibly bring up everyone.
Shout out to Digital Shadows. They actually sponsored Cactus Con this past February. You know, I'm going to say something, and some of the diehards out there are going to be like, shut his mic off. But I'm going to say it anyway. Bleeping Computer has gone from, well, let's say that they have completely done like a 360 in terms of their reporting on a lot of the more technical stuff that we're looking for. I actually learned from them myself that Abaddon had shut down. So Abaddon was a ransomware group, and we can get to the link to the exact article, a ransomware group that was hitting a number of folks. You know, we may or may not have worked some of those cases at day job, and they were not fun to deal with. and Abaddon shut down and they released their decryption keys. And I found out about it via Bleeping Computer because it's one of the tweet things that I follow on my tweet deck, to be honest. That's why I find everything via Twitter in some way, shape, or form. It's kind of funny, actually.
Yeah, Bleeping Computer is great. Like, there are a lot of sort of news sites, but I found, like you said, Ryan, like Bleeping Computer, they kind of work with researchers, and sometimes they will break things that aren't already in like other people's researcher blogs, or maybe just in a tweet. So here's not the Abaddon one, but another one on our evil using a Linux encryptor. So that's
the Abaddon one was scary because there was a release of 2,900 plus decryption keys. There was the unique number was actually far less than that, but the number of keys released was far greater than the number of clients that were ever posted to the leak site. Just to kind of give it, that's the first real view. Yeah, that guy. Visibility that I think we as a group have had into like, well, how many of these people are actually showing up on these leak sites, right? What percentage of them? I personally think it's pretty darn low.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and we're getting comments like we're sharing so much. Like, yes, this is being recorded, but we're gonna compile all the links for you. I don't have enough time to drop them all because there are just too many good ones. I brought up like Recorded Future has their reporting. Digital Shadows we talked about. Bleeping Computer. Sophos we talked about. Who else am I missing? ESET. Oh my gosh, how can I miss ESET? Folks over at ESET do amazing work. They produce a really great like quarterly or like multiple times a year threat report that has a bunch of details about ransomware as well. Who else do I have? I mentioned NCC Group briefly. Sentinel-1, great researchers there. There are a lot of great folks. So, you know, I think the key is, right, curating all of this, like figuring out what works for your team. Like, these are a good starting point, and we'll share all these links with you, but then it takes some work, right? So we mentioned a tweet deck, right? That's one resource you can use to kind of curate your Twitter feed. You can also create Twitter lists, which is another way. You know, you can add a news or anyone else to Twitter lists. But like having these links is just a starting point. You're going to have to also curate all of them. So a lot of work, but I can't believe it's been almost an hour. I probably need to go eat lunch. What else have we missed, Ryan? What else do we need to talk about?
I mean, we could sit here for hours and hours and hours.
We absolutely could.
And my monitors can keep flickering on and off. Can't wait to watch the recording and be like, oh, that does look silly. Two quick things I want to throw out is on Twitter. There's RDP Snitch and there's Cobalt Strike Bot. And those are both by close associates of mine. And, you know, identifying ransomware in the earlier stages of the attack chain. When you need to hunt, the Cobalt Strike Bot, for example, shows like the most common process names that are being used. RDP Snitch is showing what usernames are being attempted, things of this nature. Though I find those critical because so many organizations say things like, "Oh, this security 101 stuff, we've got this down. We're not going to get hit with this. We don't have RDP exposed to the internet." I don't believe it until I literally see every single log identifying all of it. The logs are all accounted for based on asset management. You know, I'll stop about to go on a rant right now, but you know, there's so much out there that we covered today, and there's so much more. It's synthesizing it, just like you said, and bringing it to a spot. And that's part of why I'm putting together this ransomware course, because there's very few places where you can go right now and spend a week, you know, just delving through core details for learning.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, just to put some what you said, right? We talked about looking across the entire attack chain. So, you know, RDP bot, look at, do you have RDP exposed to the internet? Please check. Thinking about that initial access, thinking about like crimeware, like QBot, TrickBot, tracking that, tracking Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike is commonly used by ransomware operators. You should know, right? How can you maybe try to identify that? And then ideally stop it before you get to the Xfil or the encryption, which, yeah, that's detecting ransomware, but that's going to make for a very bad day. All right. Well, I just feel like we just threw a ton of stuff at everyone and said, like, catch all of these resources. So thank you all so much for joining us. What we're going to do, as promised, we're going to compile all these links into some kind of thing that you can click on, either show notes. So keep an eye on our Twitter accounts as well as SANS Forensics on Twitter, and we'll make sure to share that out. thank you all so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed. If you have suggestions or like things you want to hear about in future live streams, feel free to hit us up on Twitter. And otherwise, have an awesome rest of your Wednesday. Take care, everyone, and thanks for joining. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Thank you for having me on. Bye-bye.